Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everybody, my name is Shambhavi and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. Joining me on this episode today is Saurabh Todi, and we are going to be speaking about a topic that is very recently gaining a lot more traction in policy circles, but we think is going to be very effective in the future in terms of making India a strong leader in the economic front. And this is going to be biotechnology. We think biotech cooperation around the world will help India to not only boost its economy, but also get strategic leadership in various areas such as health, energy, etc. So we are going to be discussing specifically about how India can utilize its position within the Quad to strengthen its biotech sector. Why is it necessary and how do we go forward, right? So first of all, what is biotechnology? Why is it necessary that we invest into it? Saurabh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what we think conventionally is biotech. We think about just, very high technology, gene editing and things like that. But it is not only just, restricted to it. Any kind of exploitation of biology for the benefit of humankind, either it is in agriculture, medicine, pharma, or environment, or whatever, they all kind of, are part of what you would call as biotechnology. So, when we kind of domesticated wild plants to become more like crops that we know now, like wheat and rice, it is also a form of biotechnology, not as much as, using high-tech gene technologies, but the fact that, we exploited the living organisms for our purpose. So now, obviously the modern biotechnology as we know now would be fairly around after World War II, where we are now using highly specific invasive techniques, which involve like recombinant DNA, gene editing, gene sequencing, synthetic biology, and things like that. So, so it's a very vast field, and especially as we see, the experience with COVID-19, how the advancements in biotechnology, especially medicine and mRNA vaccine technology, was really, really useful in trying to understand the situation and also address the situation by, the fact that we were able to develop a vaccine in less than a year is nothing short of, just remarkable. So there is a huge potential, and this sector has gotten a lot of focus since the COVID-19 experience. And in India especially, I think we were not focusing as much as we should have on this field. And I think there is a huge potential to encourage investments, research, and higher education in this field. And this can reap significant economic dividends for India, I think.
Right. So I think essentially what you're saying is that the technology part of biotechnology is what is new, it's rapidly changing, with the idea that if we can use our intelligence and our technology to repurpose biology to our own requirements has been around for a long time and has really shaped civilization. If you think about cotton and silk and trade routes around those, have definitely shaped the geopolitics of the world in an era long gone by. But even petrol and diesel, if you think about it, are biology products. So while the field by itself might not always get the interest and attention that it deserves, it has very quietly been shaping our lives for a long time. And I think there are various economies around the world that now agree that you require a lot more attention, a lot more focus on developing biotechnology. This can be for food, agriculture, as you pointed out. This can be for energy, and just for normal contribution to trade and economy. There was an OECD report very recently that said that about 50 countries have now adopted very specific policies to shape their bioeconomies. India also put out a bioeconomy report last year, Bioeconomy 2022, with which they hope that we reach a $300 million economy by 2030, which again we think might be less. We can probably be more ambitious than that because India has a lot of advantages when it comes to the use of biotech. Again, through COVID, we showed that we became the vaccine pharmacy for the world, and therefore that expertise already exists. The question now is, how do we leverage that and how do we go forward from there. I think parallel to that has been the rise of the Quad. So there's a recognition of biotech to be important, and then there's also this rejuvenation of the Quad and how the Quad can actually function to create a more safer place. Let me say that, in the world. So can you just tell us a little bit about Quad?
Yeah, so I mean, very simply, I think Quad is again geopolitical grouping of 4 countries, which includes Australia, Japan, India, and the US. The countries collaborate and cooperate with each other on many topics, and although not explicitly, but a lot of the focus of the Quad here is to build their own strengths in a way which, like in which they can support each other against China in many different fields. So, be it R&D, be it like defense, also, like trying to cooperate on emerging technologies and stuff like that. So I think, I mean, if you see, I mean, the importance of biotech, I mean, both US and China have released plans, how they're going to kind of bolster and develop their own bioeconomy. So, for example, like last year, published a proposal by the White House, to have their own biotechnology committee, which will look into, investments and which other new technologies that they should promote, they should fund, stuff like that. Even China has like a national strategy which they have released, where they focus explicitly on the fact that they need to increase investments, increase the domestic indigenization of their biotech industry and the scope that this field has. I mean, just in terms of numbers, for example, the bioeconomy numbers, I mean, of the Quad itself are humongous. So the US bioeconomy, for example, is valued as at almost $1 trillion. And Japan's bioeconomy strategy aims to achieve around the market size of 700 billion US dollars by 2030. And Australia's life sciences industry is valued at almost 100 billion Australian dollars. So there is huge scope, there is huge appetite for having to, invest in this sector. I think where India comes is the fact that India has the potential, but not as much as, ready infrastructure or human capital that we can contribute directly. So I think where Quad can come in here is where, in our capacity as a Quad member, can India, use the best practices from Quad countries, can help have a more diversified funding source from Quad countries to kind of first build its domestic research and development capability, either both at the university and higher education level, as well as in terms of industries, especially pharma and life sciences. And the second would be to, kind of maybe add this whole idea where, the world is looking to diversify supply chains, world is looking to have alternatives to China. I think given the potential for scale that India can provide, India should look towards at least trying to capture the market that China has dominated, especially at the low end of bio manufacturing, where there's not a lot of requirements of IP and primary research. So these could be like the early harvest fruits that India could look at. So I think the India strategy, which like has a 5-year outlook from 2021 till 2025, I think that could be a way to leverage this advantage.
Right. And I think that, part of the goal is to now, 10 times increase our biomanufacturing capacity. The idea to diversify supply chains, right? I think it also has its roots with the COVID experience.
Yeah.
Because it was such a huge dependence on China, particularly, for example, in our pharma sector. A lot of the advanced active pharmaceutical ingredients, a lot of the key starting materials came from China, and not just for India, but for across the world. And therefore, there is this feeling that there should be nearshoring or friendshoring of at least some of these critical supply chains. And whether India could be then the alternative to China in creating that kind of scenario, right? But there are obviously going to be challenges for India to do this. We don't really have a lot of technology that has been indigenously developed. And obviously, cooperating within the research and development sector is going to be really important for India to also then focus on getting more indigenous technology. But in the meantime, we do need technology transfers. And obviously, US and Japan are two technological leaders in various sectors, and perhaps that is another way for the Quad to help.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could also say something like where, if you see the US and China competition is actually pretty intensifying these days. So, I think if you recall the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, in 2021, I think it was like a global emerging technology summit. Actually, he expressed concern about, the risks linked with biotechnology and how biotech as a field holds great promise of, advancing science and medicine, and how, as we saw during COVID, could be a factor in accidental or intentional misuse. And so I think the fact that it is a US NSA who is expressing concern regarding biotech, and which was in a way like an implicit kind of hinting that, they now see biotechnology as a national security, as an important element of national security, and the great power competition shows that, there it would be much more appetite within Quad, especially US, to cooperate with countries. And I mean, India can provide that scale that China has to the world, where at least, the US would feel much safer to share technologies and do collaboration with India. And
Yeah, that comes to the second point, because that's the one additional thing that the US has that India lacks is funding. So I think the second big challenge is going to be investments, because ramping up biomanufacturing in particular is going to require a lot of initial investment till your products are ready and ready to be sold and on the international market. And having international support might really be helpful in kickstarting, because we need to reach a certain threshold of scale, right? Till it becomes profitable for companies to shift from a China made to an India made product. At lower scales, we are not going to be competitive. We have to recognize that, which is the third area where the Quad might actually also be helpful. If there is political willingness to spend more to get hopefully the same quality product from India as compared to China, if there can be a Quad preferred procurement policy, because unless there is demand, it's going to be very difficult to break into that market because China has such dominance. So simply saying that there is a nationalist or a Quad related sentiment that we should get Quad stuff, that is not going to be enough, because practically for a company who has to buy a certain enzyme, they will go for the cheaper one. Because I mean, if they can afford to buy something more expensive, they might go for an India product at this point of time till we reach scale. But it might be more likely that they might continue to be driven by economics more than sentimentality.
So how to and kind of address, like, is there any, like idea or something that, like maybe Quad can do something to at least, first of all, like create demand, and second would be to kind of incentivize maybe companies somehow to prefer, like, let's say the APIs or KSIs made in India as compared to China?
I think the first part starts with identifying what is critical, what critical supply chains we need to target and create alternatives to China dominant model, right? Then within that, see whether India is the alternative or whether the other places, what kind of scale is actually required, right? Once we figure out these key things which India can actually be a good alternative for, then investments. For example, I remember during COVID, the Quad actually agreed to investing in biological E to manufacture the max. So once we identify some of these core pathways, and obviously creating maybe a joint fund that invests into capital infrastructure building, that would ease off a lot of the companies' financial problems, right? Because those will also then dovetail into the cost of the product, right? If we have to take up a loan and then have to repay the loan. So maybe investments upfront would be one way of targeting the prices and making the product price competitive at the end. And the other is obviously on the other side, saying that we will buy the product at this rate, right? And then that can actually help Indian companies raise investment because there will be a guaranteed demand. I think the problem can be solved through some regulatory means. What we do require for all of this, I think, is a very strong Indian regulator who will do quality checks on the products, because the products not only have to be price competitive, but also have to be quality competitive. Particularly because a lot of these products, these are not toys, right? These are for human consumption. And we have seen that there have been problems recently. And we can't just disregard them and say that, hey, we are going to be the pharmacy of the world. We are going to challenge China on this, buy on medicines, and then have throat syrups and eye drops, which have problems. So I think there's steps as India also have to take to prove its credibility, to ensure transparency in our systems. But I definitely think that the Quad can help harmonize regulation, technology transfers, and also bring in investments that can ease it. And I think this requires to be done right now, because we can't keep on having this complete dependency on China. I think the world is kind of I think the geopolitical position right now for India is great, and we can actually leverage this sentiment. So now is a great time to actually attract funding.
Just for our listeners, like just to highlight how important quality control is in, like something like biotech products is like, like obviously if it is, like any pharma, medicines and all, obviously they need to be highest quality and all the standards. But for something, even the ones that are used, all the reagents, enzymes or cell lines or media, all these things that we are using, which are used in research labs, they also have to be the one of the highest qualities, because again, the whole point of research and everything is that your experiments should be replicable. Your experiments should, they should be able to kind of conform by your peers. So the reagents you use, they have to be of top-notch quality, because so that if the same experiment is repeated with the same type of reagents and supplementary kind of equipment, it should be able to produce the same result. And the same kind of, like research or experiment goes on for days, weeks, and so you may use different batches of equipment and reagents for the same experiment. And you have to be sure that the quality is maintained. And even if you use reagents in the same experiment from different batches, you should have that kind of trust that, the quality is maintained. So this requires actually a lot of focus from Indian regulators and also even the companies, because I think the moment you lose the trust of the researchers or your customers, essentially that, the quality is maintained and is the highest quality, I don't think any sort of, push by the government would help, because at the end, you have to ensure that you are giving the best quality at a price that is very reasonable.
Right. I think we started with this, right? That India has a lot of potential, but perhaps lacks the ecosystem to drive this potential. I think we are in a chicken and egg problem there. And this focus on biomanufacturing actually might help, because if there is demand and if we have more biomanufacturing, then obviously you have more people paying attention to this. The skills that are required, to scientific rigor that is required for biomanufacturing, we'll probably have training courses, we will have personnel development for that, which will then feed into our R&D, which will feed into our academia. And I think this is a good step for us to actually build that ecosystem around, build a biocluster around one of building enzymes, for example, manufacturing enzymes, just fermenters. But I think that by itself will have a lot of externalities attached, which would help Indian science and life sciences in general. And so while there is all of this geopolitical goodwill around, I think we should leverage it. We should try and create more cooperation within different groups. I think the Quad is just based aligned because it's a small group, but it has a lot of biotech expertise within it. There is funding and a lot of demand, a lot of markets. So I think between us, I think we are quite set. And as I said, with the biological e-vaccine, there is clearly biotechnology is a focus area for the Quad. They have mentioned it again and again. There are working groups for biotech. So they clearly recognize that it is important, both from a bioeconomy point of view as well as a biosecurity point of view, like you mentioned. So as long as it's on the agenda, and I think my biased opinion obviously is that biotech is the future, right? The more we harness technology to edit ourselves, to edit life around us, the more we can control, the more we can actually play around with biology, and perhaps, like petrol, like diesel, we can think of more of biofuels, for example. But we need people to be paying more attention to be financing it. One of the things that we have understood right now is that there is not a lot of capacity, say, within the Indian VC or private equity folks to understand how important a certain biotechnological is, to assess it and therefore finance it. So how do we build that capacity? Can financiers from outside India help us with that? So I think there are a lot of things that we stand to gain from partnering within the Quad.
Yeah,
I think should.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, the potential is immense, in every facet of life, using fuel. I mean, if you use biofuel, then obviously now the move is to not like grow crops and convert now is like to at least either have algae or certain microbes, who would be able to produce certain fuels. And obviously, in terms of climate change, carbon sequestration or like plastic recycling, all of these, could be kind of, a very important sector for where biotech can play a huge role with new technologies, again, like CRISPR-Cas9, gene synthesis and all of that. I mean, these provide, extreme flexibility and also opportunity. And I think, and as you said, not only just Quad, I think even at the level of bilateral level, I think there is like a huge scope. So for example, the US and India, have recently announced like the US-India initiative on critical and emerging technology. So it's called ICET for short. And they have identified many areas of critical and emerging technologies where India and US will cooperate. And they have identified both India and US for biotechnology as one of those areas. So that shows that there is huge appetite. And I think India on its part has to like step up both in terms of regulatory kind of reforms and also like kind of making it possible to have a more enabling kind of environment. At the same time, being a lot more collaborative, not only in terms of just best practices, but, other things, like how to do IP reforms, how to make sure that, supply chains are safe, how to make sure there is like harmonization of quality control standards, and like can we make it easier to like do trade in biotech products between Quad countries, and there's so many other possible
ethics. I think is one big
ethics. Yes,
ethics are very critical because a lot of the ethical conversations are currently spearheaded by US scientists and by US policymakers. And I think India can something that we want to be like the voice of the global south, because the same applications from biotechnology will have hugely different benefits for some of the lesser developed economies than they do in the US. And I think what is a nice platform for India to then use to also have more honest conversations about ethics and how some of these, because biotechnology applications are going to be controversial. Gene editing, for example.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, we can't at this moment, but if we do understand the basis of intelligence and can use it to make babies more intelligent, should that be allowed? Should that be used? And these are conversations that need to be held.
Yeah.
And I think the Quad might actually be a nice forum because it has partners with very different kind of approaches to ethics. And I think India can actually have a bigger say.
Yeah.
I think, those conversations definitely the Quad can be. Yeah. Cool. Anything else you wanted to add?
I think I am just hopeful that we like the opportunity that we have right now, at least in terms of geopolitics and everything, we are able to seize it. And at the same time, I think we should not shy away from for working with friends. Either it is to ask help or also to help them. I'm sure India can also provide a lot more to the global community in the biotech field than we have now. I mean, we've already shown that the Indian generic pharma industry is the backbone of global health, at least in terms of the global south. So I think there is huge potential. I just hope that with effort and focus, India and Quad are able to not exploit.
Leverage is the way.
Yes, you should be able to. We should be able to leverage this opportunity that we have.
Cool, thanks. And if you thought this was interesting, then I would like to let you know that Saurabh actually teaches geopolitics of biotechnology in the GCPP Technology and Policy program. So if you're interested, you can check that out on our website. With that, thank you so much, Saurabh, for speaking with us, and thank you all for listening. Do stay tuned for more episodes of All Things Policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Shambhavi.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.